Welcome to Becoming Parents podcast. I'm Jen Taylor, your host. I am mom of 18, and you can find me on momsrunningit.com. Remember, give a shout out to those who are brave enough to share their stories with us on how they have become parents. Let's dive right in. Welcome to Becoming Parents. I'm Jennifer Campbell, your host. Today I'm here with Kim Peacock. How are you today, Kim?
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
I am so excited for this. And when we spoke for a few minutes prior to jumping on, I told you I've cried like two times, maybe three on this entire podcast in 6.5 years. And I'm just warning people that today is probably going to be a crying day. So
Yeah.
I am so grateful for your strength in these conversations. Jump in and tell me about how you became a parent.
Well, I was 18 years old, 5 days after my 18th birthday, and I thought it was a good idea to get married, which in hindsight, wasn't the best thing for me. But, when you're 18, sometimes you think you know everything. And shortly after my first husband and I got married, I became pregnant with my first child, and that's Nicole. And she is the little person that made me a parent. And I wasn't always the greatest parent because I really had to kind of grow up with her, especially her first few years. I was blessed because she just had a sweet spirit, easy kid, just happy go lucky. So I didn't always make the best parenting choices during that time, but the Lord had mercy on us with that, and she turned out amazing. Then a few years after my divorce, I met my husband now, Larry, and we got married. So he had a little 2-year-old, and Nicole was 3 at that time. And so it was kind of like so they were best buddies. We're kind of like the Brady Bunch. At that time, we thought, okay, this is it. This is all, we're going to have 2 little girls. It's going to be great. We had lots of goals and plans. And I ended up getting pregnant, but it was with an ectopic pregnancy. And I didn't really understand what that was even. I was having some pain in my abdomen. Went to the hospital. The doctor said, well, you're pregnant. My first instinct was, yay, this is great. I didn't really understand until he explained to me what that was. And so I had even going from excitement to sadness in just moments as I learned that that baby wasn't going to be able to live. Yeah. And that was so devastating for me, even at my young age, because I was really naive with loss at that point. I decided that it would be okay if I don't ever have a baby again. It would be okay. Well, a few years later, I got pregnant with our daughter, Megan, and she is our youngest. So then we were excited. We said, okay, now we have hers, his, and ours, from his previous marriage, my previous marriage, and then our biological daughter. I will say, though, all of them, as far as loving, they're all the same. Like people talk about a blended family. It's the same. Like I have had people literally ask me, well, how did you handle, I'll do it in air quotes, his daughter? Well, she's not his daughter. She's our daughter. She's as much part of me as the children that I birthed. And so that was something I never did struggle with. And life went on. The kids grew up. It became a routine. And we thought, okay, we thought 2 this is it. Then we thought 3, okay, this is it. And then the girls got older. They showed horses. We homeschooled. We traveled. We had a really fun, exciting life. It was kind of messy because, kids are messy. Life is messy. And then we felt compelled to adopt from Russia. And that's a story in its own, but that it took us a little while to do it because we're like, okay, this is a big deal. This is hard. I had never been out of the country. We ended up adopting our son, Alex. He's a joy. And so, okay, now this is it, and so when you go through life, especially when you're young, you think, okay, this is it. This is how it's going to be. You never really expect how things are going to be in the future. It's never how you picture it's going to be, good or bad. Hard things happen, happy things happen, but we learned how to just adjust through those. A year after we adopted our son Alex from Russia, we were on a family vacation, and our daughter Nicole, from my previous marriage, the one that I grew up with, she was in an accident, and we were all together as a family. Most of us were there, and we witnessed the accident, and it took her earthly life. And that shattered everything that I thought I knew about how my life should be. I thought if I did everything okay, if I did everything right, if I just was a good enough mom, if I was a good enough person, that nothing bad was going to happen like this. I thought things like that only happened to strong people. Again, I was really naive, but it thrust me into a really dark time that rocked me as who I believed I was as a woman, a mom, and a wife. And I had to reestablish my footing during that time. Later on, we ended up adopting a couple more boys, but I kind of call it my dark time.
Yeah.
But having the other kids, our daughter Megan, who was 11 at the time, she witnessed the accident as well. She saw her dad doing CPR on her sister. I had to mobilize and put my grief aside. Okay, I'm going to put this on the shelf for now, which you always have to deal with your grief, I believe.
Yeah.
But I had to put it on the shelf, and in a way that was a gift, if that makes sense.
Yes. So there's a lot that I want to unpack here. Blended families. You guys blended when the kids were 2 and 3. So I have a blended family also, but we blended later. And I had an ex-husband, and my husband had been married, had 3 kids, divorced, remarried, had another daughter, and his wife died. So we had a couple, and he was with his second wife when his older 3 kids were 5, 3, and 1. So they were little. So they were like in your situation where you blend families and they're young, they were very connected to his second wife, some more than others, some differently. And, that's a different story. Like you said, there's some things that are totally different stories, but, I was dealing with, when we blended families, my ex-husband and my kids came forward and said he was physically abusive, and I had full custody, and we were in court 3 or 4 times a year for years. And then my new husband, he had an ex-wife with his oldest 3 kids, same thing, sort of. Lots going on with that situation, and they weren't in court, but it was not a friendly relationship most of the time. And then a wife that had died, and like blending families was really hard for me. So where it seems like for you, the kids were little and it was easy, although I do not love any of my children differently. The kids I adopted,
Yeah.
right? I adopted 3 at birth, 1 at 2, 1 at 5. The kids that I had long-term in foster care, I'm not talking short-term, I'm talking like 4 years or more, right? Those kids, regardless of when I got them, at 9, at 10, at whatever, I do not love them differently. And then my quote stepkids, which right, for logical legal purposes, these are our stepkids. I don't love them different. The relationships, though, are different based on where those kids have come from. But so I want to talk more about the blending of families. It was, you each had 1 child, and they were about the same age, and they were young. Were there interactions with, like, it's easier to blend families, I think, when they're younger. And also if the ex-spouses are involved less, or it's a healthy, positive relationship. So I know, like, that's like, I can't talk a lot about my ex-husband or his ex-wife, except to say that it really wasn't a happy, easy situation. So we were constantly dealing with the fallout and the back and forth from houses, and like all of that.
Yeah. And that's an important, that's an important distinction. Even going back, It was because the girls were little, it was easier. However, we did both have my ex when my ex and I got divorced, it was basically because we realized, okay, we were young. This was just this was a mistake. It was pretty amicable. It was pretty, there was always stuff. There's always stuff. However, on the other side and just for the sake of distinction, our daughter, my stepdaughter from Larry's first wife, that was not so easy. And that caused, because, and I know, I mean, this, the weekends, you have to plan your whole life around the visitation schedule.
Yes.
We ultimately did get full custody, which was such a blessing.
Yeah.
And that made all the difference, because just the back and forth and dropping off and always getting into a spat, or just the complication of that, and the complication. And I know you've talked about it before. You do not talk bad about their birth parent. You just don't. Out of respect, it's not good for them mentally. It's not good for them emotionally. That's not a healthy thing.
And it's hard.
That's what I was going to say. Although you want to. Yeah. Because
and you're not perfect at it, even though I can say I tried really hard to never talk badly about their dad until they were adults and started the conversation, and it was more their perspective. I tried really hard, but I was absolutely not perfect at that.
Right.
Like 100%.
Yeah. Well, you have this other relationship. You have these kids that you love them with this irrational, crazy mama bear love. And you have this other person who doesn't always, or it doesn't seem like they always have the best intentions, or maybe selfish intentions. Whatever it is, it looks damaging to that relationship. And you have to think about what is best for that child, no matter what that is. And that went along even with foster care. We ended up doing foster care. It's the same with foster care too. It's just a blended family. You have to support that child in the way that whatever is going to be the best healthy way for them to, because they're grieving. Even the stepchild, they're grieving because they don't understand all this stuff. The foster or the adoption, there's trauma in all of that. And so it's a different relationship for sure, just like you said.
Yeah, I just don't want to skim over that, because it's becoming a parent is the hardest thing I think most of us have been through. And I mean, you may have had certain situations that are more challenging, but like parenting doesn't end. There isn't really always a plan B. And it's harder. I have a daughter with a couple kids, and she was a nanny a lot, babysat a lot, one of my older kids. And I said, parenting's different. And she realized on her own, like, parenting is really different. And it's harder, and you don't get a break. And I think that's important to have conversations about, that parenting's really hard. Blended families, and like you said, foster care. We've both done foster care, and we've both done adoptions. And there are layers in those things that are added, because there's other parents involved out there, whether they're involved daily or you have full custody. Like, it almost doesn't matter in which arrangement you have it set up, an open adoption versus not. You're going to have to come to terms with the fact that there are layers and trauma and hurts with these kids that you may not see, but that are constantly impacting your life. And you're trying not to talk badly about the other person. I have foster kids where I've read their intake information and police reports and literally thought, okay, I could be homicidal. Like, I want to go kill that parent for what they did to this child, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think in these situations, you're faced with your own humanity and parenting skills in a very different way. And you know, I'm not minimizing how hard parenting is with two parents who raise their kids, but like this is layers of different and usually more challenging. So let's not blow over that.
No, I would agree. I would agree for sure. And you have genetics, like you said,
Yes.
trauma, all their life experiences, all of that takes place. So there's no mold. There's no
There's
handbook.
no mold. There's
Mhm.
no mold.
No.
And then, okay, so you each have one, and then you had an ectopic pregnancy. Let's not
Yeah.
blow over that either. It
Right.
doesn't matter if you're not planning on getting pregnant, but you're in a great relationship and that pregnancy makes you ecstatic, and then you lose that pregnancy. That's
Yeah.
that hurts. I mean, I had 3 miscarriages, and I mean, my
Mhm.
heart aches for that and for women who have
Yeah.
done that. So you experienced
Yeah.
that also.
Yes. Yes. And I think we can't, all grief is different. We can't
Yes.
compare our grief, but I think someone who has suffered a miscarriage, they're grieving. There is
Yeah.
no doubt, you can't minimize that. And I think that we need to, in our culture, we need to take some time and acknowledge that, because grief is grief. And I think that that's important. And I didn't even know how to grieve that.
No.
So, I just had to keep going. And then later, actually, after we lost Nicole, I was able to revisit that and go, oh, okay. And in some way had to grieve that, because grief comes, it kind of piles on top of each other and is
Yeah.
compounded. And then every time you have to deal with another loss, you still go back, or I do anyway. I go back to, the lower levels of my grief.
Yeah. Yeah, and it comes up, you know, when you jumped on, so I don't read anything about my podcast guests until we're getting ready to come on. And I do that intentionally because I really want this to be a genuine conversation where we're getting to know each other. I'm getting to know you more than you're getting to know me. It's more
Mhm.
about your story. This one's hard because we have so many overlaps in our story. But basically, like I like the surprises. I like knowing just a little bit, you know, so I can keep myself on task. And when I read your stuff this morning, I was like, oh, this is going to be a tough
Yeah.
one because we've
Yeah.
both done foster care. We've both done
Yeah.
adoptions. We've both lost babies. We've both lost
Right.
kids. So
Right.
I don't want to brush over, you know, the blending families. You're my sister from another mister living in
Yeah.
Tennessee. I mean, it's not
I
very
think so
often
as
that
well.
happens, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah, we're hugging virtually.
Yeah. There you go.
But I don't want to minimize any of these things because the loss of a
Right.
pregnancy. And so I was saying that because I wasn't thinking about my son or my miscarriages this morning. It isn't that it's not always present with you. I wasn't thinking about those losses at all until I read your information. And I was like, it's like a 2x4 to the air in your lungs. You know, you're like,
Right. Yeah.
and so there are things that are going to happen. You know, I work with women who miscarry, and it's often not triggering for me. I think we can get through enough of our grief that although it's never gone, we've grown bigger than it
Mhm.
is. And so our grief is more manageable and we are able to help other people. And I know in your situation, you've done the same thing, you know.
Mhm.
Um, it still though will creep up and be like, pow, like a bat to the head, you know, where you're
Mhm.
like, holy cow, there it is. Very real and very
Mhm.
hard, even though it's always simmering on the back burner. It never
Mhm.
goes away. It's never not there, but sometimes it really rears its head. So, you know, ectopic pregnancies, miscarriage, that loss is very, very real and very hard. And I don't want to brush over that at
Mhm.
all.
I
And
agree.
and then you did adoption. So tell me, you did foster care in the US afterwards?
After Nicole passed away, we did
Yes.
do,
Okay.
yes.
What was it like with Russia? You hadn't had anything to compare it to at that point. You guys just
No.
felt in your hearts that you were going to adopt. What was
Mhm.
that experience like for you? What was Russia like?
It was amazing. Scary, crazy. It tested every one of my comfort comfort levels. We started at the beginning of the year. We thought about it for about 4 years. And just a side note, we figured out later that Alex was born about the time we thought about it. And even just the story about thinking about it, I went to a church, they were talking about Russian adoptions. My heart was moved. You know how you'll have your heart move on something and you're like, okay, is this something I'm supposed to do? I told my husband and he said, no, we don't
Yes,
need to adopt. We need to, support them financially or whatever. So it took us 4 years. We about January got approved. And by December, we were flying to Russia. We had no expectations. So it wasn't like, oh, I want to have a baby girl or I want to have a baby boy or it has to have these parameters because we didn't know. We're like, okay, well, what are we supposed to what child are we supposed to have? And we really felt like God led us to Alex. And he was the first child we looked at that was available. And we're like, he looks good. And so we met him. We flew to St. Petersburg, crazy flight, because I had never been on a flight that long. So that even tested me.
Yeah.
Pulling up in Russia it's just like you're going into a different dimension for sure. And we met him. We went to St. Petersburg. We kind of hung out there and we had somebody that was with us most of the time, thank goodness. And then we went to go see our little guy. And he was so cute. And the ladies there at the orphanage, they call them children's homes or desky domes. They were so good and they had prepared him. This is your new mama and your new papa. And so he came out and we had sent him some toys ahead of time. He had the little toy that we sent him. They have community clothes. So he was kind of dressed in some girl clothes and some boy clothes because they just have whatever. And he came out and he came right to us. And
wow, so they really prepared him.
They prepared him and he's still this kind of person. It's like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do. Okay, I'll go do it. And we had to take him to go get passport pictures.
Okay.
And so they took us, but when we dropped him back off, he looked very concerned. And my husband and I are like, you make sure you tell him we're coming back. But you could see in his little face, he didn't cry or anything, but yeah, and you could see because his mom dropped him off there when he was 2 years old. And we don't know why. Probably financially, that was to save his life.
Yep.
Probably that was the biggest sacrifice. Sorry. That was the biggest sacrifice she ever made that's how I picture it anyway. And then 2 years later, these other people are here. And he's only 4. And so he doesn't, really grasp what life outside looks like. So we ended up going to court in Russia. That was crazy. They have very strict rules. My husband kept putting his hands in his pockets and the interpreter kept pulling his hands out like, no, look at the judge. But she was interpreting. We didn't know what was going on. It was just insane. We were so glad to leave court because it was a lot. And then we got to go get Alex and it was so cool. We went and picked him up and then we got on a all-night train from St. Petersburg to Moscow to get his passport. That was another crazy thing. God. So we're in this, they said, don't leave the compartment, right? Don't leave the little compartment. It had beds and stuff. Just stay in here. Well, he was a nervous Nelly. Alex was, and he kept wanting to go to the bathroom. And they said it's not safe. You got to hurry and go to the bathroom and come back. And he didn't sleep a wink. It was, he was just excited. He had never been in anything like that.
Right.
Then we went and got his passport. And they told us not to overstimulate him, but us good Americans did everything like the circus and the little carnivals. And so we probably overstimulated him a little bit too much, but we were super excited. And then a few days later, we were there for 10 days total. A few days later, we got on the plane and he had some struggles, because he had some like raging tantrums that he had to go through. Yeah. There was so much stuff built and he didn't know how to communicate that with us. He didn't even know English. So he didn't know how to speak our language or anything. Wow. So, but he has grown. I mean, everybody thinks their kids are amazing. He has grown into the most amazing young man. Him and his wife are expecting their first. Oh. And so I'm just super proud of him because there was some rough years where like, I don't know how's this going to turn out. And then one day, he just decided. It's like he just decided. Um, and even with Nicole's death, he just decided, like, Mama, or he asked Larry, my husband, Papa, where is Nicole? And he said, well, she's in heaven, buddy. He goes, oh, okay. Is she happy? Larry said, yes, she's very happy. And for him, he just decided. And that's kind of how he does his life. And so super amazing. But he had to separate from his birth mom at 2, separate from the Dexky Dome at 4, and then a year later separate from Nicole, who was his
Oh,
very best, like
wow.
bestest buddy in the world. She spoiled him rotten. He was he's this 5-year-old little boy by then, and she's carrying him around like he's a baby. And then he has to separate with her.
The next thing in your story is, how old was Nicole when she died?
She was 17. And she was so much a part of me. She was more like me than anybody else in the world. And because of our past, of us growing up together those first few years, and I know it was the first few years, we just had a special bond. I don't love any of my kids more than the others, but I have different relationships with
That is
each of them.
100% true. And let's stop and let's pause and highlight that. I don't love any of my children differently. I connect with them differently, though. And that's based
Right.
on my personality and their personality and how they handled any, like, even bullying, like not necessarily trauma within by their parents or
Right.
me just messing up because I'm human. I
Right.
tried really hard to be a great mom and failed miserably every day because I'm a human being, and that's, thank goodness
Right.
for God's grace on that. But they interact with me differently, and where they are in their lives and what their struggles are as adults, because now most of my kids are adults, all those things. One of the kids I was closest to growing up, that was just the easiest kid for me, hardly talks to me now
Yeah.
at 24. And my heart breaks daily because of that. But I can't change his journey. It isn't about my journey. That's his journey, right? So I completely understand. And I remember once my kids saying, like, you don't discipline us the same now. I mean, the end result is the same, but like, I'm gonna hit you where it's hardest. And where it's hardest for you isn't the same as where it's hardest for, like,
For
Brianna,
sure.
man. All I had to do was take away books, and that kid was devastated. Nobody else cared about books that much that could be a punishment. One of my kids didn't want to be alone, so timeout was in his room. Like, I'm gonna give you the consequence that makes the most sense to you.
Exactly. Our daughter Megan, she was a terrible. So she's the third, and she's a mom of 5 right now and homeschool. She's like amazing. But when she was a teenager, she could not clean up her room. Like, it was it was such torture. So I'd tell her to go in her room. Okay, you go in there until you get your room cleaned up. That was rewarding her. She just laid on the floor and colored and daydreamed. And so, yeah, exactly. Where one of the other kids, it would have been torture for them to be by themselves.
Yeah. So sometimes the kids are like, you treat us differently. And I'm like, yeah, you're totally different personalities. I got to figure this out as I go. And now I want to move into the loss. Because I lost my son when he was 23. And I know prior to that, if you ever have a conversation with anybody, like, what's your worst fear? And most parents will say, a child dying, losing a child. And definitely I was aware that was my worst fear, because you love your kids and it's not natural for them to go before you. There's like a natural order to things. And I was right. It was the hardest thing to go through. And I also felt like if it ever happened, the only thing keeping me grounded would be the other kids. And that was 100% true. My son was part of a sibling group of 4. And so one of them was adopted, and the other 3 I had long term. And he was one of the kids that I had for years and years and aged out with me. And now he was 23. And his sister that I adopted, you have to be there so much for your kids because you don't want them to totally fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
That definitely she's the part that kept me grounded, because it killed me to think about not having it together enough as a parent and allowing her to fall apart like she's going to
Mm-hmm.
anyway. But as a parent, it's my responsibility to do everything that I could. And that was true. It was the hardest thing, and the other kids kept me grounded. And it wasn't just her. All the kids, the whole family was reeling from this loss, but she was definitely the one that connection kept me the most grounded, because I
Mm-hmm.
really felt like I wanted to be strong for her. So you guys, this was an accident where you were there, you saw it, which I think would be more traumatizing. You were there when you lost her. Your husband performed CPR, you said, and I think maybe less traumatizing in some ways and more in other ways to watch it happen and feel that helplessness. So I want to take, because you've written a book, and you did adoptions in the US through foster care after this loss. And foster care, you're terrified about loss anyway, because you can get all
Right.
excited about these kids coming to you, and then they're taken from you when you're in that adoption program. So share
Mm-hmm.
with me the story of how you got through it and writing the book, and then the adopting kids after that loss.
Okay. The getting through it is, you've heard the term just small steps at a time. But just like you said, the other kids, our daughter Lisa, who was Nicole only a year younger than Nicole, she was not
Right.
with us. So we had to drive home. It was about a 5-hour drive. And it was just the longest drive of my life. I just still feel like I can look at the road and just see it. Well, first of all, walking out of the hospital, the doctor gave us the news in a very blunt way. He said basically she died at the beach. It was in Pismo Beach in California. And he said those words, and we just kind of crumbled together as a family. But shortly, just minutes after that, I looked at our daughter, Megan, who was 11 at the time, and I could see she was going into shock.
Yep.
So I had to take my grief right then and put it on the shelf and then zero in on Megan, because she was it was serious what was happening to her physically.
Yep.
So we had to tend to her, get her wrapped up. She had witnessed all of that. She had witnessed probably even more than I had close up. And so we had to tend to her. So my focus then was on her.
Yep.
Then after we got her stabilized, we had to walk out of that hospital and know I have to leave Nicole here. And that was the weirdest thing. That was so hard because it felt like I was abandoning her. And then then our focus shifted into how are we going to break the news to Lisa? And Lisa and Nicole were best friends. They shared a room. They shared everything. They shared friends. Their lives were so intertwined. So when we finally got to my parents' house where Lisa was, and we broke that news to her, I'll never forget. She said, "No, you're not. That's not true. You're kidding. You're lying." It took her so long to absorb that. So, and then Alex, he was right at that moment, a matter of fact. And one thing I had to learn is, well, while Megan and Lisa grieved differently because they had different relationships with Nicole, and some of it popped up later. Some of it boiled for a while because, all the people are there, all of that. I had to be careful not to ignore Alex and his grief, because even though he was a matter of fact, he still was in sorrow. He had only been with us a year at that point. So it really did help us. Although eventually I had to take my grief off the shelf and deal with it, it helped me get through those first months to just kind of get our family stabilized. And I know you understand that because there's so many components. And later on, Megan had some struggles in, 14, 15 years old, and I believe it's from that. And then moving on, we thought, okay, we need to just settle down as a family. We need to just kind of get back into some sort of new normal. What does this look like for our family? And so a few years later, we kind of felt like we were getting our feet under us. And my in-laws, Larry's parents, came to us and said, hey, we have these relatives, these children that we had never met, but they've been taken away from their parents. They're in the system. They're in the foster care system. Would you consider adopting them? And I didn't say it out loud, but I'm like, no, I can't do that.
Yeah.
I cannot open my heart. I can't. Yeah, I can't do that because I felt like I was finally feeling a little normal.
Yeah.
And how was I going to risk? And also I was aware of, domestic foster care, this whole system, because they have to go into foster care before. And we were in California at the time. And so they have to spend a certain amount of time in foster care and then you can adopt them and all that. But after a few days of considering, I'm like, okay, you said it a little while ago. It's not about me. It's just not. That stings. Sometimes I get so mad.
That stings because especially when you hurt so much, and look, you're never going to stop hurting, but you hurt so much and you don't want to open yourself up in a situation where you know that there's a likelihood that you're going to hurt again. And I have to say, from doing foster care, even when you adopt them, the trauma that they've been through and helping them work through that and reading the paperwork on them and of what they've been through and bringing them to therapy, that feels like a loss because you feel how their life could have been different and it wasn't. It's interesting with Alex because he was brought at 2, probably like you said, for financial reasons. Look, the women who have the ability to love a child and know that by walking away they give them a better life, my love for those women, it runs so deep. I can't comprehend being faced with that decision and being selfless and handing a child over because I know that it would be the best thing for their life. I can't imagine doing that.
No.
This is different. Foster care is different because it's parents who got this child, and for whatever reason, whatever their trauma is and whatever their addictions are and their demons and all those things, they did things to their child that hurt them. And that is where I lose a lot of respect. So in foster care, for me, I had to really struggle with letting go of how I felt potentially about the parents and focusing on that child getting through their trauma to have the best life possible. It's a very different, I don't know what to say, energy. It's a very different emotion, and you are putting yourself through this after the loss of a child.
Yeah, I really didn't think I could do it. I really didn't think that I had the capacity to put my heart on the line again. And we ended up saying yes. But unfortunately, those boys were in and out of that home 3 times. And because the foster care system, social workers are overrun, it's really a flawed system. And so you cannot blame one particular component of that system. However, for those boys to go back to that home 3 times, and I didn't even realize that until I read their case file years later. I hadn't even gotten, I finally got that paperwork and I read through it. And so I think about the damage that was done to them during that, and they were not abused, but they were highly neglected, drug exposed, alcohol exposed, all of that. So, but while they were going back, we were still foster parents. So we got calls all the time for placements, short term, long term. And I told my husband, because our job was to love those kids 100% while they were in our homes, whether it was hours. We had one that was years. We had one that was days. I had a newborn baby, preemie baby, that was 2 months, and he did end up going back to his mom, and it was a good thing. But all of those things, how do I love them 100% and hold them with an open hand? I had to learn how to do that. It was
Yep.
the craziest, because when your job while they're in your home is to love them. But that every time you love somebody, there's risk. You're opening up. And I already had this fragile heart that I tend and still do tend to, I fight it, cling on to things, because I don't want to give up one more thing. And so I have to really work through that. And so it was definitely a process. And by the time the boys did come to us, we had several foster care placements, and the boys are great. You know, they've had their struggles, but we had to deal with birth parents and their relatives. So that kind of adds a twist to it. So it's been a journey for sure.
I'm not sad at all that this is a slightly longer podcast. And that we've both been crying.
Yeah.
You have a quote on your website on the About Me page that I would love to read, because, and I'm gonna bawl, but I really think it's important. I know people can go find this. I think it's important though to understand how you beautifully said this. And then I'd like to talk about how writing the book, you adopted these boys and you got through that. And I think for me, I had to pray about every child I was called about. And with 18 kids, you think like, well, you took them all. I said no more than I said yes.
Right. The need is so great.
It's so great. That's how sad it is. I mean, look, 4 of the kids are biological, my husband's, and 4 are mine. But of the 10 kids that we took from an outside source, I said no a lot more than I said yes. And every one of those, I had to really feel like they belonged in my home. And sometimes you want the answer to be no. Because it's hard.
It's
and
hard.
When it's yes, you're like, well, let me reword that. Hang on, let me rephrase that about this child. Is this child my child? It's really hard. So you did get through that. You did end up adopting them, and you wrote this book. And I want to read this quote, and I want you to tell me how the book helped in your process, and the joy that came out of it. Because this is a tough subject. I'd like to end on something, the joy that either the book came or, you know, I mean, I could talk about super happy things about my son, even though he's gone, things that make me laugh so hard I pee my pants, that are really great and wonderful and beautiful within that loss. So however, while I read the quote, you can think of how you want to discuss the book and talk about how you live with the grief and it's never gone, or we wouldn't be crying today. And there's so much beauty because now you're speaking about it. You've written a book. You're helping other people get through this. So you wrote, there are still hard days. I long to see Nicole and hear her voice. I think about her every day, even when it doesn't show on the outside. She's on my mind. I am still a work in progress, and you are too. I don't know what depths of grief your heart has experienced, whether it's the loss of a child in death, the loss of someone you never imagined living without, or if it's the loss of a dream. But I will tell you that you will make it through this. The scars on your heart or on your body are reminders. They are reminders to others and to ourselves. We are more than survivors. We are conquerors in our battles. We are victorious. And that is a beautiful thing.
It is a beautiful thing. And when you're in the first few days of grief, it's hard to ever imagine being that. We had a friend that gave us a bookmark that had Nicole's name and the meaning of her name. And the meaning of her name is Victorious Heart. And when I read that bookmark is still on my bathroom mirror, because Nicole lived with a victorious heart on earth. And man, I'd like to see her. I'd like to squeeze her. I'd like to see her as a mom, all of those things. But I also can learn from her life now, and learning and walking through those first few days, those first few months, then years, it grew into a passion for me to have a victorious heart, because I want to honor her life here. I want to honor what she did here, but also I believe that she's in heaven. I believe I'm going to see her again. So I believe I have that hope. That's something that has helped sustain me. And then what I realized is if I'm just taking in this healing or this comfort, more of a comfort, because I don't believe we're ever completely healed. I believe we learn to walk in a different way. But taking in that comfort, but not allowing it to flow through to others, it becomes stagnant. And when we pass our comfort on to others, it's like this conduit of healing. And so that's what inspired the book. I actually didn't even write the book until late 2019. I didn't get it published until then, because I had so much learning that I still had to do. Then once the kids were out of the house, it was like, okay, let me process what has happened all of these years later. And was blessed to be offered a publishing deal on that. And that was the thing that pushed me into continuing writing. And so, but as I was writing, it was peeling off the layers of my grief. And I realized there was still some things that I needed to deal with, because when you do put your grief on a shelf to help to help your children and then to help other people, sometime you have to take that off the shelf. And so there were still little pieces of my heart that were on the shelf that I had to dust off. And I really feel like it's been a help for so many people. And then this year, I had the opportunity to record it on Audible for audio, and I said when I was approached with it, I said, I can't read it. First of all, I don't feel like I'm a great reader. Second of all, I can't do that. But it was such a therapeutic process, because reading it out loud, hearing the story again peeled off some more layers. And I've had a lot of people come to me and say, hearing it in your voice has been so helpful for me, because when you are in grief, it's hard for you to have concentration to pick up a book and read. And so, that has been a tool that I have gotten a lot of great response on, just having on audio version.
That's amazing. I bought the book. I bought it on my Kindle, but yeah, I love being able to support you that way, but also reading it for my own situation. So everything is in the show notes, all of your links, your Facebook, Instagram, your website. You can learn about you, other speaking that you've done, the book, all the things are there, really easy to find. What's the easiest way for people to reach out to you?
Probably through my website. There's
Okay.
links to my email. You can contact me on that easily. And I try to get back to emails pretty quick. So
Kim, obviously my heart, right? Thank you for being brave and strong. Thank you for letting me share parts of my story with yours. It's an honor.
I feel the same way, Jennifer. You have blessed me, and your bravery in telling your story time after time after time on your podcast. It's helping people so much, and I count it as such a blessing to be a part of this. Thank you so much.